Hi, my name is Melvin García, and in this video presentation with my classmate Jonatan Corcio and Karla Videz, we're going to talk about the chapter 18 and chapter 19 of the book The Study of the Language of George Yule. So let's start with the first questions. What is meant by a standard language can be pluricentric or monocentric. So let's start to see the difference between these two definitions. Pluricentric is when a language have different standard forms, which usually are from different countries. On the other hand, monocentric is when where the language has just one standard form of itself. So let's see some of the examples. Pluricentric, we have the English. In English, we can have, for example, the African American, the American English, the British English, and in the other hand, with monocentric, we had just the Russian and the Japanese. So now let's see the two differences between accent and dialect. Accent is more focused just in the pronunciation. Dialect is the study of the pronunciation, the study of the structure of the sentences, grammar, and the vocabulary. So that's the big difference because accent is just focused on the pronunciation, and dialect is focused on pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. Now, what is dialectology? Dialectology studies the different varieties of dialects. Regional varieties are not different language. Regional varieties are the different dialects that we can find in the same language. This means, for example, in a country where they speak the same with just one language, we can have different varieties of the dialect in different regions. Vernacular is a common language that people use in everyday situation. It is more frequently used for informal situations. It's a kind of language or local variety. What are isoglosses? Isoglosses are those imaginary lines in a map. Let's imagine a map, for example, El Salvador's map. Here we have El Salvador's map, and there is an imaginary line who separates two different geographical areas with different dialects. How can we see, or let's see an imaginary line in El Salvador? For example, Lempas River is a line who separates two geographical areas. For example, San Salvador, Cuscatlán, San Vicente, Huit, San Miguel, La Unión, and Morazán. And there is some words that where we can see the different of the dialects. For example, let's see this object. This is, for example, in Cojutepeque is known as Huacal. In San Miguel, this is known as Paila. What is a bilingualism? Bilingualism is the ability a person has to communicate and to speak in two different languages. It can be oral and writing. So, in the next question says, what is code switching? Code switching is the act or the action that a speaker does when he passes from one language to another, or can be from one dialect to another dialect into a conversation. It happens without breaking any phonological rule. The next question says, what are the levels of bilingualism? So for individual, we had related to the bilingual development. Then we had the family, who is the bilingual child raising. Then we had the societal, who is policies and cultures. Then we had the school, who is the bilingual education. And the last one, disciplinary, who is referred to academic, to professional, and to related fields. And the last question says, what is diglossia? Diglossia is the existence of two varieties of language in the same community. These varieties can be found in two different levels, the high level and the low one. Let's see an example. For example, in a black community in the United States, in Ohio, they use both the standard American English and the African American English, depending on the context and the situation where they are. So now my classmate will continue with the the last part of the chapter 18 and the chapter 19.
Hello teacher, my name is Jonatan Corcio. What are the high and low varieties? Well, for me, a low and high varieties are a kind of quality in language, in which a low variety is a kind of informal language, and a high variety is a formal language that people use for referring the same thing. That means that someone that is in the high variety can use some synonyms for referring the same thing. So, next question. What is the case of diglossia and social distinction? As we know, diglossia is an imaginary line that divides a region into two parts. So, in social distinction, we can say that diglossia divides a region, and we have in a side of that region two different words for referring the same object in a low and a high variety. What are pidgin languages? Well, a pidgin language is a language created from two different speakers or two different regions that speaks two different languages. So they have to create a common language for communicating each other. That means that this new language is a contact language. They use some words for create a new language, just only for business or for make a contract. This is not a complete new language. Next question. Which features are taken from the two languages? Well, for create a pidgin, I think that the most important features that they can use are sounds. I mean the accent and the pronunciation for create a pidgin. Next question. What is a Creole? Well, a Creole is a kind of pidgin, or well, it's not exactly a pidgin, but it's based on a pidgin, but that pidgin evolves, or that pidgin goes beyond that communicate between two different persons that has different languages. So that Creole becomes a totally new language with its own rules. So now we pass to chapter 19, that is social variation in language. And the first question is, what is social linguistic? And social linguistic is the science that studies the relationship between the language and the society. Next question. What are social dialects? As we know, social dialects are dialects that come from the same language. So, if we speak English, we have many different dialects. In society, we have two different dialects, a formal and an informal variation of the same language. So, in social a society, can divide into a lower, middle, and higher and upper class. That means that each class sometimes has their own dialect level. What is the role of education and occupation in sociolinguistics? Well, I think that the role of education is make people to have a degree or a level in a society. That means that these people that has a degree, academic degree, has a more proper language. Next question. What was the experiment carried out by sociolinguistic William Levitt? Oh well, this sociolinguistic made an experiment related with pronunciation in the difference between lower class, middle class, and the upper class, because he went into three different, I don't remember exactly, I guess they were shoe stores, but the difference that he noted in those stores was that people belonging to the same shoe store talks in many different ways, even if they are using the same language. That means that they use different dialects for communicate. So in the lower class, we have some different language or some different dialect for communicate, different from the upper class. Next question. What are social markers? Well, social markers are marks that divide a language into many varieties. That means a formal and informal language. And the last question is, What is speech style and style shifting? Well, speech style is the same thing. That is a division into formal and informal language. And the style shifting is the capacity that a person has for switching into an informal and a formal way. So this has been all for me. Thank you for watching.
Hi, my name is Karla Videz, and today I will answer you some important questions related to social variation in language. So let's start with the first one, which is about prestige. Well, we said that prestige is the consideration or respect a speech community has to a dialect or to a language. Let's move on to the second question, which is about a speech accommodation. Well, this is also known as linguistic accommodation, and it is the ability a speaker has to adjust his accent and his word choice to lead his speech style similar or different from those people he is talking to. A very clear example of this is when a boy from Kentucky changed his accent when talking with people from other states. Now, let's talk about what is convergence and divergence. Well, convergence is when a speaker changes his speech style similar to people from his talking, and this is because he wants to create closeness between them. A clear example is when we find our friends and we start talking in the same way they do. Well, divergence is the contrary, because this is when a speaker changed his speech style to create distance between people he is talking to. And an example from this is when a teacher is scolding his student because he wants to establish a line between them. Then we have what register means, and it is the usual way people use language in context. This context can be situational, occupational, or topical. So it is the language used depending on the context. An example of this is when a journalist is reporting the weather on a TV program. And this is because this journalist has to use a formal style while talking, and this is because of the situation. He is in a formal situation. Well, now I will answer the question, what is jargon? Well, jargons are technical words or phrases that are used by profession in their working areas. Some jargons related to finance and used by accountants and other professionals are balance sheet, net, profit, and liability. See the difference between slangs and taboo terms. Well, slangs are also known as colloquial speech, and they are non-technical words that doesn't belong to a standard speech, and that are most used by younger people that comes from a lower social status. An example of this, an example of a slang is bye, before anyone else. And an adolescent can say, bye, you're the best. And taboo terms are obscenities, and they are also known as swear words. These words are inappropriate in most situations, and these are avoided for politeness, prohibit behavior, and religion purposes. Well, some slangs are tits, which means breast, and shit, which means feces. I will also explain you what is African American English, and it is a variety of English language that is spoken by African people in some regions of the United States. Well, this variety is also known as Ebonics or Black English. This variety has also some social markers that distinguish it. And well, now let's pass to vernacular language, which is a local version of English language, which is not a standard and which is mostly used orally by lower classes. An example of this is from Pennsylvania, Appalachia, where people say yous instead of saying you all. And finally, in my personal opinion, I consider African American vernacular English has its variation because it has suffered dialect continuum.